And welcome back, everybody. We're talking to CEOs and business leaders. And today we've got another fantastic guest, Director of Life Sciences at Sterling Bay, Dr. Suzet McKinney is here. Suzette, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, great. And I do want to talk about life sciences with you and your role at Sterling Bay. But first, one of the great things about doing this podcast is I get to learn about everybody's story and
Okay.
share that with my audience. And your resume is amazing, and your journey so far has been really interesting. So let's talk about that a little bit. I know you grew up in Chicago. And I think the story goes you originally wanted to become a medical doctor.
That's right. That's right. I originally wanted to become a neonatologist, which essentially is a very highly specialized pediatrician. Neonatologists only treat the youngest of patients, 0 to 30 days. So that was what I wanted to do originally. But I tell my students, you have to always be prepared for opportunities that come your way, and you never know, when your plan and your career path might take a turn. So I assume the question, Bob, is, what happened? What changed, right?
Right.
So I will tell you, when I graduated undergrad, I graduated from Brandeis University, which is in Waltham, Massachusetts, about 10 or so miles outside of Boston. And there was a large number of students in my graduating class who, like me, were also graduating pre-med. And I had done an internship with a fellow at Harvard Medical School. He was a neonatal perinatal fellow, and all the time that I was in the hospital with him working through this internship, he would always talk to me about his research and his interest in public health, which actually got me interested in public health. So I decided after graduating from Brandeis that I would apply to graduate school, get a master's degree in public health, and spend 1 year working in public health. I saw that as an opportunity to help me be a better clinician once I finished medical school. So that was what I did. Came home, applied to graduate school. I attended a school in the suburbs of Chicago. When I graduated with my master's in public health, it was June of 2001, and I immediately started looking for just the perfect job within public health. Well, needless to say, 3 months later, 9/11 happened.
Hmm.
And the job that I got was serving as the bioterrorism regional coordinator for the city of Chicago. And I thought, okay, not quite sure exactly what that is, but I'm in, let's go.
Yeah.
So I take that role, and to say that it was just fascinating would be an understatement.
Hmm.
Well, of course, at the end of the first year, I wasn't ready to leave the position, so I decided to give myself another year. And as they say, the rest is history. The bottom line was the field of public health emergency preparedness was so fascinating and so intriguing to me that I wasn't able to pull myself away. And then I had a decision to make. And that decision was, whether or not I was going to turn my back on what had been my lifelong dream and pursue a career in public health. And so, of course, I decided to pursue the career in public health, but I didn't want to just be in a job. I wanted to have a career, I wanted to be in leadership. So I took what I call my own independent assessment. And I
Hmm.
looked at leaders across a broad spectrum of public health agencies. I looked at large cities, New York City, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., even in my home of Chicago. And I looked nationally. I looked at the federal government, the CDC, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And everywhere that I looked, every person in leadership had some form of a doctorate degree. And so the message to me was clear. You can have a great career in public health, you can be a leader, but that doctorate degree goes a long way. And so, of course, I applied to graduate school once again for my doctorate degree in public health, and here we are.
So, did you at any point have any guilt? Like, I should have become a doctor. My parents said, I should become a doctor. Did that ever go through your mind when you're making that decision?
It did. And actually, it was my grandmother. My
Huh.
grandmother told me when I was very young, probably 9 or 10 years old, that there were two things that she wanted me to do in life. She didn't care what I did as long as I did these two things. So the two things were play the piano at her church and become a doctor.
Wow.
Well, needless to say, I never played the piano at her church. So I had to become a doctor. She never specified what kind of doctor. So I feel in the end that I did fulfill what my grandmother wanted me to do. But to your question, I have always wondered what it would be like to work in the NICU. And so anytime that I've had the opportunity, and as you know, I served as CEO of the Illinois Medical District for a few years,
Mhm.
and we had 4 hospitals in the medical district, but obviously I have colleagues across, healthcare, multiple different hospitals. So every chance that I have to visit a NICU, whether it's on a volunteer basis or if I'm taking a tour of the hospital, I try to make sure that I spend a few minutes just talking to the nursing staff and, stopping at, bassinets and just cheering on those little babies. And, it's my way of still getting, the excitement and the fulfillment and the energy that I get from the NICU. It's still my favorite place on earth to be.
Oh, that's great. Well, and so you're at the Chicago Department of Public Health, and you're thriving in those roles, and they're also pretty high profile, public roles. As you're going through that process, at any time did you feel, I don't know, maybe a lot of people struggle with self doubt or imposter type of syndrome, where it's like, wait, am I ready to be in these roles?
I wouldn't say that I suffered from imposter syndrome, but what I will say is that, we were dealing with some very serious threats and hazards to our city. When I first started with the Department of Public Health, it was bioterrorism. But literally every single year, there was a new threat or a new hazard that we needed to respond to.
Hmm.
And it got to the point where in our office, we would have conversations and speculate about what we call the disease du jour, what was going to happen the next year. And so it went from biological terrorism to chemical terrorism. Then we became concerned with radiological and nuclear terrorism. And then Hurricane Katrina happened. And all of a sudden, it was natural disasters.
Hmm. Yeah.
And, then there were some, at the time, what we considered large scale infectious disease events. And so we started getting concerned with infectious diseases. And then, the avian influenza was spreading in Asia, and that
Right.
became a concern. So pandemics were thrust into the spotlight. So, again, dealing with pretty scary conditions, threats, hazards, things that most people
Yeah.
don't think about. I will tell you the first time that I felt like, oh my God, what am I doing? Was in 2009. By this point, I had advanced completely up the career chain, and I had been appointed deputy commissioner, which is an executive level position within the department. And I was now overseeing our Bureau of Public Health Preparedness and Emergency Response. And in April of 2009, we had H1N1 here in the United States.
Right. Right.
And that was the very first, and let me say this, leading up to that, prior to becoming deputy commissioner, I had participated in a number of emergency response events. But I was always, a worker somewhere within the chain. when H1N1 happened, that was the very first emergency response, large scale emergency response that I was responsible for leading. Not just my team and our larger department, but because that was a public health incident, our public health department was what's called the incident commander. So we were the lead for the city. So I had colleagues from all of the public safety departments across the city of Chicago taking their direction from me.
Hmm.
And I just thought, holy smokes. So, but what I said to my team is, this is what we planned for. This is what we trained for. We know what we're doing. We have to put that training into practice. We have to, pull those plans off the shelf, and we have to execute. Our job is to keep our residents safe and healthy. So, let's get to it. And
Yeah.
that was what we did.
So, as you mentioned, then you go on to become CEO of the Illinois Medical District. How did that process come together for you? How did you go from public health to that new position?
Well, like I said before, there was something new every year that we had to respond to. So 2009, 2010 was H1N1, and we had lots of smaller events after that we had to work through. And in 2014, the worst of the worst happened. The class of diseases that we call the viral hemorrhagic fevers. And, every time I say that, people look at me like I have two heads. And I say, just trust me when I tell you those are diseases that make you bleed from places you're not supposed to bleed from.
Yeah.
So Ebola, 2014. Ebola is a member in the class of viral hemorrhagic fevers. We had always known that Ebola existed in a remote country somewhere. At the end of the day, was never supposed to come to the US, and it did. So once again, I stepped up. I was still serving in my role as deputy commissioner for the Chicago Department of Public Health, and I led our operational response to the Ebola outbreak. Well, when that ended, I had to have a conversation with myself. And the conversation was, that was the worst of the worst. That was the thing that was not supposed to happen, but it did. And not only did it happen, I survived. So now what? And I felt like I needed a new challenge. I didn't know what the new challenge was. I had no idea what I might do next. And it was a little bit of an internal conflict for me because I absolutely adored the work that I was doing at the Chicago Department of Public Health. But I am the type of person where, I always need a challenge. That's what keeps me motivated. That's what, gives me the energy that I need to keep going. And one day I got a phone call expressing interest in talking with me about the CEO role at the Illinois Medical District. And quite honestly, in the beginning, I wasn't interested because it wasn't something that I saw in my career path. But, I agreed to the conversation. And as the conversation evolved over time, I decided maybe this is something I can do. Maybe this is the next challenge. And so obviously I agreed to take the role, and boy, was it a challenge. People would often ask, what does your role entail at the medical district? And I would often say, it's the perfect storm of public health, healthcare, finance, real estate, big business deals, and politics all rolled into one. So that's how it happened.
Well, what do you recommend to people who may be in a similar situation to where they feel like they need a new challenge, or maybe something new, or maybe they're just not happy with where they are?
Sure.
What do you recommend to those people?
I think the first thing I would recommend, don't do like I did and leave it to chance. If I had to do it all over again, I would really think much more critically about my passions and my goals, So my advice would be, think about what it is that you're truly passionate about, or is there something that you have really wanted to do, a place that you really wanted to take your career, but perhaps you haven't had the opportunity. And if that's the case, go out there and look for the opportunity, but recognize that you may even just have to create the opportunity. But that's the first thing. The second thing is, in my situation, an opportunity came my way that I wasn't expecting. And while I wasn't expecting it, while it wasn't something that I saw in my career path, I was still amenable to having a conversation about it. And as I said before, as conversations evolved, I began to recognize how much of an opportunity it was. And so the lesson for me, which I now offer as advice to others, is, never let an opportunity pass you by, at least without analyzing that opportunity, thinking it over very critically, perhaps even talking it over with friends or family members, and, see if it's something that, might take you to a different place. I often say that, you know, 2009 was the year that I sort of, and I don't mean this negatively, but that was the year that I sort of lost control of my career, if you will. And what I mean by that is I've always been a planner. I have always planned out my next step, even if that next step was 2 or 3 years down the line. But once I got that doctorate degree, professional doors began to open for me that I didn't even know were there. And so I have never been able to plan since that time, because the more I work, the harder I work, doors continue to open. And I don't always see the opportunities coming, but what I am doing is making sure that I am always open and amenable to the conversation about an opportunity.
Well, that's interesting. If you're working hard and are in kind of a creative space and keep your mind open, like what you're saying, it's really interesting how the universe kind of has a way of working things out for you, maybe in ways you probably don't even realize sometimes.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So let's talk about your new role, well, relatively new role over at Sterling Bay. Now you're in the real estate business.
I am. I still consider it a new role. It has been just about 10 months. In fact, it'll be 10 months on Friday.
That's new.
So just 2 days from now. This role was a very interesting role for me, but I saw it as an opportunity to be able to work in a space that would allow me to do something that I'm passionate about, and that is improving health outcomes, especially for people who are living in areas where you don't see a lot of great health. And it started when I was at the Illinois Medical District. So there was a point in my tenure at the medical district where I had two major problems that I was struggling with. The first was trying to determine the best and highest use to develop the 40 acres of vacant land that we had in the medical district. So that was a real estate challenge.
Yeah.
But the other challenge, I was working with the hospitals in the medical district, a number of other organizations, healthcare related organizations in the district, and a few healthcare systems from across the city. And we were all working collaboratively to figure out what we could do as healthcare leaders to make an impact on the health outcomes of residents living in communities that surrounded the district. And the impetus for the work was the discovery of a 16-year difference in life expectancy if you live on the west side of Chicago as opposed to downtown Chicago. What we had all learned was that discrepancy, or disparity, I should say, was attributed to the social determinants of health. So things like lack of access to education, lack of access to jobs, poor neighborhood infrastructure. So we were working collaboratively, but we were also each individually turning inward to our organizations and our institutions to identify what those institutions could do to assist in turning around these life expectancy disparities, but also poor health outcomes that we saw in these communities. So, two very unrelated problems, or at least seemingly they were. The more I dove into the real estate challenge that I was struggling with, the more I began to learn about life sciences. To make a long story short, I decided to develop the land into a life sciences innovation park. I learned a lot about the economic benefits of the life sciences. You know, the fact that 40% of life sciences jobs only require a high school diploma or GED. I learned how for every dollar that's spent in the life sciences, an additional $1.27 is created in the broader economy. I learned that for every life science job that's created, another 3.5 jobs are created in the broader economy. And the light bulb began to go off. And I realized life sciences could be the key to turning around some of the poor health outcomes. Because for the 40% of jobs that only require a high school diploma or GED, if I could impact people's health care indirectly through their economics, and life sciences was the key to help me do that. So that became the plan. And we set out, myself and my team in the medical district, to do this life sciences thing. Well, interestingly enough, I was talking to developers from across the city and even some from outside of our city, trying to convince them all to come and build a life sciences facility in the medical district. And at the point that I came in to meet with Sterling Bay, they actually talked to me about their plans to launch a life sciences division, but also to expand their footprint in the life sciences nationally. And that was a situation where I saw an opportunity. And for me, the opportunity was to impact poor health outcomes, not just here in Chicago, but all across the country. So that is how Sterling Bay came about.
That's a super interesting story for sure. And I can see how they would just swoop you up and say, "Hey, you're coming with us."
You know, and I was happy to come. I mean, you know, this issue around poor health outcomes and life expectancy disparities, it's a very, very big issue. I don't think many people recognize it, but I will tell you in 2019, the NYU School of Medicine did a study of life expectancy across our country, and they found life expectancy disparities in communities all across this country. And the vast majority of those are due to what I mentioned a few moments ago, the social determinants of health. And I think, you know, the challenges that we saw across the US with COVID only amplified it. I mean, I'm sure you heard the stories about entire communities not having access to COVID testing, let alone health care that they needed to keep themselves and their families healthy. And even with the vaccine rollout, we had communities all across this country that had challenges accessing the vaccine, you know, and so it's all related. But I firmly believe that, you know, we're all better off when we care for those who are the most vulnerable among us. And so, again, that's something that I'm very passionate about. It drives my work. And so this was a really exciting opportunity for me to come to Sterling Bay and do this work here.
As you know, I'm in San Diego, and we have a very robust life sciences ecosystem here, and it's really changed the whole community. So,
Yeah.
and I can relate to how impactful that can be to local communities across the country.
Yeah. Yeah. San Diego is one of the top life sciences markets in the country, top 3.
Yeah, it's really uh, everything that we're talking about here locally for sure. And kind of on that note, as you mentioned the pandemic and really the life science real estate demand really intensified at a rapid pace here and across the country. Where are we in that curve, do you think? Are we going to continue to see that rise in demand for lab space?
Absolutely. I honestly, I don't see that demand slowing down anytime soon. If, the first thing I would say is, life sciences before COVID was already the fastest growing industry in the US. The more young talent, in college, working in research labs in universities across this country, and then spinning out companies based on the research that they were doing and the discoveries that they were making in those labs has really been, the fuel to the fire for life sciences, if you will. I think COVID highlighted the importance of the life sciences. I mean, when you look at the need to develop diagnostic tools to detect the presence of COVID disease, even the development of the vaccine, collectively, those things are life sciences as well. So I'm just seeing an increasing demand for lab space across the country, so much so that places like Boston, where we have traditionally seen life sciences clustered in one specific
Mhm.
area, the demand is so great now that centralized locations, centralized districts for life sciences can no longer accommodate the demand. So we're just seeing spread everywhere. And again, I don't see that slowing down.
When you're talking to life science companies, and we're talking about a tenant in development, let's say,
Right.
um, the I know it's very user focused, and life science tenants have very specific needs, not just in the space, but around the building and the community as well. What are you hearing from these companies when you're talking with them?
Well, the first thing that I'm hearing is the need and the demand for high quality lab space. I said to a colleague of mine not long ago, long gone are the days where entrepreneurs are agreeable to work in, dark, gray, very drab laboratory buildings. The joke that I hear often, and it's not really a joke, but people just make light of it. Scientists are people too. Scientists like to have a beer as well. So high quality lab space surrounded with all of the amenities that one would need and want to live a high quality life. So coffee shops, restaurants, bars, retail, residential, easily accessible by public transportation. Not everyone's interested in driving to work. You may want to take a scooter, you know. So I'm hearing that. I'm also hearing the need for flexibility in these laboratory spaces.
Right.
Companies are determining that, maybe they don't need 5,000 square feet of space. Maybe they want to, just concentrate their work in 3,000 square feet of space. However, there is that need for flexibility, because as the company grows, they may need to take on more space. So those are the two major things that I'm hearing and that I'm seeing. I think we will also begin to see a greater demand for professionals like me in the space. And what I mean by that is, people working within life sciences in commercial real estate that not only have a scientific background or a healthcare background so that they understand the language of the scientist entrepreneur, but also someone with that healthcare or that scientific background who also has, some business expertise as well. And quite honestly, I really credit my time at the Illinois Medical District with giving me the business acumen that I needed to combine with my public health and healthcare experience that brought me to a role such as the one that I'm filling now here at Sterling Bay.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask you about that. So, I'm in the business as well, and on my team, I've got people that have worked in lab spaces. They've built lab spaces. They're science people. And how important is that, do you think, going forward when we're talking about these lab real estate projects?
I think it's very important, again, because the work of these companies, these startups, scientists, the researchers, and I even include in that what I like to call, the physician entrepreneurs, doctors working in hospitals across the country that, perhaps weren't satisfied with the medical interventions that they were able to utilize for their patients. And so they developed something new and innovative. Um, I think it's really important that those of us on the commercial real estate side that are working with these scientists and these entrepreneurs truly understand not just the language that they speak, but some of the rationale behind their work, why they do the work, what they're gaining from the work, because it gives you a deeper understanding of what their needs are, and they appreciate that you come to the table not with a sales pitch, but with a real desire to help them do their work better, because the end result is an improvement in some aspect of health or science for all of us.
Great, well said. And I'm going to let you go now, but before I do, we're coming up to the first of the year and wanted to talk with you about what do you do to stay at the top of your game for next year? I don't know if you set goals or maybe your strategy of setting goals. Um, Leave us with a little bit of advice on how to do that.
I am not the type of person that, I don't really set New Year's resolutions or anything like that. I have a number of mottos or little sayings that I live by, but one of them, and I would say the most relevant to your question, is stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is, I consider myself to be a lifelong student. So for me, life is about continuous learning and continuous improvement. Anytime I find something that I don't quite know as much as I think I should know, then I seek out, some level of education, whether that's a seminar, a workshop, a training, class or something like that, I go. I recently did an executive education program, 5 intense days at one of our universities here because I wanted to, understand a particular area of business a little bit better. When I tell you I thought I was going to die because it was so intense. But, at the end of the day, I was very happy that I did it. And even if, a listener, one of your listeners doesn't have time to do something like that, I would offer up what I used to do in my early career, that first job at the Chicago Department of Public Health. Anytime I found, an extra 5 or 10 minutes in my day, I would pull up the internet and I would just Google a couple of key words related to the work that I was doing.
Hmm.
And I'd look for articles, journal articles, or magazine articles that would come up related to those keywords. I'd just read a couple of articles. And every now and then I would stumble across an article that I thought was really intriguing. I'd print it out, stick it in a folder, and save it for later. But what I found was that over time, just reading those articles was augmenting my knowledge base. I'd be sitting in a meeting, we'd be, discussing a complex problem and no one could figure out the answer to it, and something would come to mind for me that I read in one of those articles, and it would be like, where'd you get that from? Everyday reading, So that's the way I try and stay sharp and just keep myself ready for whatever may come next, because remember I said I haven't been able to figure out what was coming next in a long time, so I have to stay ready so that I'm never in a position where I have to get ready.
I love it. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
That's right.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Suzet McKinney, thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it, and continued success. And I look forward to talking again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. It was so
Okay.
great to talk to you today.
Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.